Hello, hello, hello. Helen Harwood Snell here, expert storyteller and communication coach. I come on once a week live on Tuesday Tales to share with you how to use storytelling in business. So every now and then, I'm going to be popping in doing solo events like today. And today we're going to focus on how to tell a good story. So you've seen the masters. Maybe it's a comedian, maybe it's that most intriguing person at a party, you've read a great novel, or you've seen a dynamic stage speaker. So we're going to look at some simple tools in the tool belt of all of these great storytellers. So first, let me clarify. Business storytelling is a little different than writing a fiction novel, or maybe even speaking from stage, or even sharing a story with friends at a party. But the basics of storytelling are all the same. There needs to be a hero. This establishes empathy with the audience. They need to feel that they can relate. There needs to be a call to action. This further builds the relationship, the relatability, and it also starts to introduce values. There needs to be a challenge. This is what adds the intrigue, the fascination, the animation that keeps people engaged. The learning or the help often comes from you. And that's the next phase, which is the change for the person. Sorry, let me just clarify that. So we have the call to action, then we have a challenge. This is the entertainment, the further building on shared values. Then we go next to the learning or overcoming that challenge. And that's where you provide the real value in the story. And in business storytelling, in particular, the learning or the help often comes from you. So keep that in mind as we go through. And the next part is the changed person, if you will, or the success. And this provides proof of concept. It shows the audience that you care about them and their success. And that cycle in the larger scheme of things is called the hero's journey. And it was developed by Joseph Campbell many, many years ago, I think like in the 1940s or something. But the easiest illustration for that hero journey is to look at a hero. So someone from mythology like Hercules. So for example, Hercules didn't know he was a god. So he was, awkward, someone that didn't fit in the world. He had this uncommon strength that scared people. His challenge was that he found out that his father was in fact Zeus, a god. So overcoming the challenge is to become the hero for him and to be with the gods on Mount Olympus. So he heads out on a quest. So let's call that his call to action. So the problem was he was doing all these heroic deeds, sometimes, worked out correctly, sometimes weren't necessarily proving his worth. But I'm basing this version of Hercules, his journey, on the cartoon from Disney, by the way. So his problem was he was doing all of this heroic performance, but it wasn't enough to satisfy his father. So he couldn't meet the challenge that his father put to him. He didn't quite understand what the heroism was that he was looking for. So his help came on this journey was training from this guy named Phil. Actually, in the real Greek mythologies, that would have been Philontides. But Phil helped him train to become stronger and faster and smarter, all of the things he needed to be able to do to fight multi-headed dragons and all those kinds of things. But his real lesson came when he sacrificed himself for love. Of course, in the cartoon version, that was for Meg. So why I love the cartoon version is the story that we can see the story arc so clearly. The version in the cartoon demonstrates that there is both these intrinsic and extrinsic values that you can appeal to or think about in your storytelling, sell to, because that's why you want to use story eventually in business, is to sell. So if you will, as a business storyteller, the extrinsic value or the external value for Hercules was he wanted to become a hero. That was his quest. That was his goal. That was his call to action. But the intrinsic value, so this is something internal that was feeding one of his needs on the scale of hierarchy of human needs. He was looking for love or looking for acceptance. And so that human hierarchy starts with basic things like food and water, and then it goes to things like, love and social community, those kinds of things, and then it moves up the pyramid and eventually gets to self-actualization, legacy work, that sort of thing. So meeting values that are more internal than external really helps drive a deeper need. So what we see in this Hercules movie is this love that he felt for Meg. He was willing to give up his life, even though he didn't think she loved him back. So he learned to get past that kind of value of reciprocity. I'm going to be a hero by doing this. I'm going to get love by doing that. So he gave that up instead. He gave love instead of looking to receive love. And so this is a beautiful illustration of the mythological hero's journey to be able to share with you. So I'm not going to spoil the end of the Disney movie, just in case you haven't seen it. But this is a great example of how to engage in a business story. The hero's journey, if you're not writing a novel, or pardon me, if you are writing a novel, is much more complex. But in a business story, we can just look at these basic pieces. And one of the key elements of a business story is to make your audience feel like either they are the hero or they can be the hero based on how you tell the story. You know how you might hear a speaker or even a more complex story at a networking event and you just kind of tune out because the story is often about the speaker. I was trimming a tree in my backyard when XYZ happened, and this is what I did, and this is how I'm so wonderful. The important part of a business story is drawing your audience in and making them feel like they might be the ones trimming that tree. So the first way you can do that is to make them feel all of the senses. So, as I was thinking about putting this together, it's a crisp fall sunny day. I could smell the rosemary from the potted plants below me as I brushed by. Whatever it is that you can engage, sight, sound, taste, all of those things, that helps elicit a deeper emotional connection to the story. You could say, I saw the contrast of the dark shadows cast by the tree juxtaposed against the brilliant fall leaves against the bright blue sky. You want to engage the audience. So think of those emotions when you're telling the story. So that would be number one on your journey to engaging this hero idea. So bring emotion. The second thing that you want to do is tell the story in a way that doesn't make you look like a hero that they can't become. So if we look at the tree trimming story, you could add all this emotion and drama and talk about how you climbed the tree to the very top, 45 feet above the ground. You reached out on a shaky branch and you trimmed off the offending branch that was going to fall on your shed or whatever that story is. That's not an achievable goal for most people. Most people wouldn't climb 45 feet in a tree. It would be more appropriate to share that you have this problem of this tree branch overhanging your shed and there had been a storm and the branch is cracked and its diameter is maybe over like 2 feet around, and the attempt that you made to use a trimmer from the ground and trim back some of the end branches to take the weight off the upper branch didn't work. You could talk about the frustration. You could talk about the little effort you saw if the branch went back up a little bit. Maybe you climbed a ladder in your backyard, maybe 8 feet off the ground, and you were shaking and reaching up with the shears or the handsaw, doing what you could do to trim back that tree branch. That's something people could relate to because most people aren't arborists. So again, that emotion, maybe that fear, that shaky attempt, could also be an opportunity to express failure, that you just couldn't trim back the substantial heavy parts of that branch that were causing jeopardy to your fence or your shed. Excuse me. Your hero moment might be when you realize that sometimes doing things for yourself is good. It's something to be proud of. But oftentimes making the decision to call an expert to do it makes you a hero as well. I'm just going to take a sip of water. So for you in a business story, that could also be a perfect example for you to tie in whatever your business expertise is. It might be you're an accountant, and to actually be able to do your books the way you need to, maybe you're doing, complicated cross-border business. Pardon me. So that's what I do. So, this could be a really great example where you could talk about maybe you could do your monthly bookkeeping on your own, trimming those smaller branches, but then realizing you need to call in an expert to help with some of the larger issues, the big branch of your problem, like filing your taxes. So you could just see through that example. I use the idea of the hero having a problem, facing the situation, to trim this tree, getting the help they needed, calling the expert. We've engaged the emotion, but we've also made this into a realistic story that other people could relate to and realize that they could also be that hero. So maybe part of the hero journey is that you talk about the fact that the branch was maybe not even from your tree, but it was your neighbor's tree. It's reaching over into your yard. That could reach into those intrinsic values around community. Maybe you paid to have not only your own branch trimmed, but extra branches to help out your neighbor for their shed or their fence or whatever the situation may have been. Maybe it changed the dynamic of your relationship with your neighbor. There's all sorts of things that you can draw from to expand that story or reach a different level of depth in that story. The success, of course, is the part where not only do you succeed, but you engage your audience in being able to see themselves in that success. And that's where the hero journey is so important in business. You don't want to be a hero to your client. Let's say you're that accountant. Sure, you might want to rescue them if they're behind on their taxes by a couple of years, and you fly in on your great white steed and you fix up all their books and get them back on their feet. But no one wants to look at someone else being the hero all the time. Part of our human experience is to think that we're a hero in our own story. So your story needs to focus on them in that accounting scenario, for example, being the hero of their own story by realizing they needed to engage a bookkeeper or an accountant on a monthly basis to keep them on top of things, because this is eventually going to help them with projections of expenses and revenues and all of the things that you don't get to do when your books are 2 years behind schedule. So their learning experience for the person who's behind in their books was extrinsic, solving that late filing issue, but then intrinsically or internally having them feel like they're a hero because they've taken charge of their business. They're predicting their future revenues moving forward because they made the decision. So they're taking the steps to make those changes. So any story like that you tell in business, even, a cute little story that you share at networking, needs to have a purpose. This is a great way to talk about, trimming this tree analogy and using that for your accounting business. There's lots of different purposes to sharing story, establishing your expertise, giving your backstory, all sorts of things. But when you're gathering stories, when you're thinking about things that are happening to you, you always need to think about the purpose of the story. And it also needs to be able to engage the audience emotionally and make them feel like they could be that hero of their own story when they're listening to it. And the huge bonus is if you can dive into that intrinsic or internal value. So think of that next time you're putting together a newsletter or maybe a social media post or introducing yourself at a networking event. Could you pull a little story in that engages the audience and gives them this trust and this connection to you, helps build your personal brand, tell people who you are? You can join me regularly on Tuesday Tales to hear more on business storytelling and communication, and also to see me create stories for my guests when I invite entrepreneurs to join me to share their journey in life and business. We create a business story together that they could use to connect with their audience. So you can start your storytelling journey by assessing your communication values. You can crack your bank code in my bio link. This helps you understand how you communicate naturally with the world, but it also gives you a little bit of an idea that sometimes you need new language based on the communication values of others. So keep thinking story, tell a story, change the conversation. I'll see you next week.